Ruth 2, verse 3. So Ruth went out and entered a field and began to glean behind the harvesters. Let me hit the pause button there for a minute. Do you know what gleaning is? Gleaning was an ancient practice ordained by God. It was essentially the poor people picking up the garbage or the scraps left behind. You see, as a harvester went through, inevitably there'd be some grain that they dropped and they didn't get. And God said, let the poor of the poor go behind and allow them to pick up that leftovers. When I was in college, there were some guys who claimed to be gleaners. But in their expression of it, they would hop in the dumpster behind Jewel, and they would find the food that had expired or was dented, and they tried to argue biblical precedent here. Gleaning, that's what we're doing, Admittedly, gleaning was picking up the garbage. Now, Ruth has no other employment options, and so she turns to this humiliating practice, and she's out there trying to get any little bit of grain that she can. As it turned out, Ruth was working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. Boaz, all right, remember I told you about him? He owns the field. He is rich. He is godly. The people of the town respect his character greatly. And it just so happens that she's ended up in his town, or his field. Verse 4. Just then, Boaz arrived from Bethlehem, and he greeted the harvesters. "The Lord be with you." "The Lord bless you," they answered. He's compassionate. He's godly. What a guy. Oh, and did I mention he's single? All right. Yeah, that becomes evident with this next statement, verse 5. Boaz asked the overseer of his harvesters, "Who does that young woman belong to?" That's a very polite way. He's assuming anybody that good looking, got to be married. And so I'm just going to ask, who's her husband? And the overseer, the foreman over the harvest, he says, "Well, it turns out she's a widow. She's not married." "Oh, is that right?" And they have a conversation about Ruth. And apparently Boaz had heard about Naomi returning to the town as a widow with a widowed daughter-in-law. And her reputation has gone before her. And suddenly Boaz is just really, really excited about this gleaner. I know he's excited. I'm not going to read the next 9 verses, but if you do, you'll find that he introduces himself to Ruth, and he's falling all over himself. He's like, "Yeah, thank you for gleaning in my field. Please know you're welcome. Every day, don't go to other fields. No, those are bad fields. Come to my field." He says, "I've instructed my workers concerning you to treat you well. You're vulnerable in other fields. You are protected here." And he says, "Did you notice we have a water station for the harvesters? If you get thirsty, help yourself free of charge to the watering station that we have over here. And meals, by the way, I provide food for all my harvesters, and you're invited. Would you please come and eat?" And then he instructs some of his workers. He says, "Do you see this new girl here? Her name is Ruth." If you find her gleaning behind you, I'm asking you to be sloppy. "What do you mean, boss?" "I mean drop lots of grain, so she's gotten over abundant." "Boss, that's bad business." "Do what I say." "Okay, boss, whatever." And so that's what happens. And Ruth is like, "Man, these guys don't know what they're doing. Look at all this." And she ends up with a 30-pound bag of grain. She comes home to her mother-in-law, Naomi, and she's like, boom. And Naomi's like, "What did you do?" And she's like, "I don't know. It just worked out great. I found this field, met the owner. He's the nicest guy. His workers are sloppy. They were dropping it like crazy." And Naomi goes, "What's going on here?" Naomi asks, "What was his name?" "What do you mean?" "The name of the guy who owned the field who was so nice to you." Ruth is, Boaz. And Naomi, let me read her response.